again. A grieving father, alone, under the mantle of midnight. He fought his eyelids as they began desperately pulling themselves back shut. A victory on this front meaning a new battle and attempt to keep focused. The man shifted his figure upwards in his seat, bringing his broad shoulders back to full height. He lost track of how many times he had to sit himself upright. Yet through the full length of the night, the tree line had remained the same. His lungs seized at every movement in the brush, refilling, after a short pause, with the frosted air of fall and with bitter disappointment. He tucked his hands under the small woven blanket on his lap, his callous, cracked hands foreign to the pillowy nature of the wool they hid under. It was his wife's idea. After so many cold nights, their daughter would need her blanket more than ever. Saharia had vanished into the cold darkness of a fall night very similar to this one, with only a large orange bow to her name. One would wonder how the parents still had hope after 3 days. Hope, however, was all they had left. Trackers, hunters, woodsmen, and neighbors had all searched for her. They had also promptly given their condolences, but her parents never faltered. They were the only ones still waiting. Yet when Nolan had awoken hours ago to relieve his wife of her watch, his hopes is what spurred him out of bed, swept him into his heaviest clothes, and led him out into the night. He remembered gently shaking his wife awake. "Up you are, love. Bed is a far better place to rest." Nolan patiently waited, allowing her to wake at her own pace. He watched as she peacefully opened her eyes and felt a deep sorrow as worry once again crept its lines across her face. "Still not a sign, Nolan." She paused for a moment, controlling the quaver of her voice. "I'm not sure if she's coming back." Nolan stepped behind her, placing a pair of giant hands over hers. He rested his thick, bearded chin on her head and spoke carefully. "I wouldn't be so sure, Lake. Any daughter of yours, I'd instead fear for the woods." The two shared a somber chuckle until quiet once again settled over them. Lake stood up slowly from the old rocking chair, her long straight hair disheveled by the wind. "Her blanket, Nolan." She spoke softly as she gently pressed the soft cover into her husband's hand. "She'll need it, for when she comes back." They challenged themselves to smile, and traded places, vows cemented by a kiss goodnight. Grievously interrupted by the shaking of foliage, Nolan was ripped away from the past. He quickly scanned his surroundings with new vigor that sprung him to his feet. Orange and ochre trees surrounded the village, peppering houses with fall color as the season began to change. The dark stone gray that made up the city's roads appreciated the color, and collected leaves in piles along the walkways. Then there was the well, proudly sitting in the center of town, its grayed wood weathered and splintering, the bucket rocking back and forth in the air rhythmically. An empty crib. "Saharia!" His call fell empty, met only by the cruel return of silence. He followed his spirits and sunk slowly into his seat once more. The scene of the city stayed the same as it had always been, or maybe how it used to be. Their town is always logged peacefully in the wilderness, far from civilization. Visitors were rare and strangers even rarer. Recently, however, there were stories. Stories of a robed figure spotted eerily still on the edge of town. Superstitions were high in such a small, secluded town. Nolan knew this, and did his best not to see ghosts in the night air. But he couldn't shake the thought anymore. It had dug its way into his brain. Then there were those who said they saw the man, getting closer, every day a few paces further into town. But like a specter of torment, he would vanish shortly after, changing shape before eventually tormenting the townsfolk once more. Many accounts originated from the old gravedigger, a man Nolan had come to fear himself. Even when Nolan was a boy, the gravetender told them stories of creatures that stalked the yards, just as he did, waiting to prey on those who strayed too far from the path. He remembered his horrid cackling laugh once, after a particularly gory logging incident. "You best watch yourself, child. Death's stench is cruel upon your nose, but it's sweet nectar to the likes of the crows." Frantically shaking his head, the thought lost its grip on his mind. He looked once more to the tree line, and his stomach turned at the sight of crows, cawing together, almost to taunt him. Damn you pathetic scavengers! Standing up and throwing his arms out in intimidation, he did his best to get the wretched things out of his sight. There they stayed, however, in defiant laughter. He indulged in his rage, plucking the biggest brick he could from the path. He hurled it at his hecklers. They only regrouped once more and redoubled their efforts to madden him. He felt the anger fester into helplessness and threw himself back in his chair. The legs creaked in protest at the sudden heft. He sat with his head in his hands as the vermin around him continued their chortling for what seemed like an eternity. And then it stopped. Suddenly. He slowly raised his head from his hands, just in time to see the murder erupt from the trees, shooting skyward, their shrieks devoid of the torment they held before. He was still, mimicking closely the sound of the muted world around him. Nothing. The wind itself didn't dare breathe. He held his gaze on the sky, frozen in the fall air. Breaking the silence with a heavy sigh, he once again allowed himself to breathe. Battling with the dark thoughts plaguing him, he did his best to avoid assuming the worst for his daughter. She'll be back. She has to come back. But his whisper did little to liven the night, and he looked outward towards the tree line, past the homes, beyond the well, and the crooked figure looming over it. He was first to doubt his own vision, rubbing his eyes and trying to correct away the stale figure, still as the air. It didn't leave. He tried to free himself from his dream, certain he would awake in his chair. It was no dream. Fear. Fear not for himself, but for those he loved. This was just a rumor, a sick joke on a grieving father. His fear transmuted, the black smoke in his gut twisting, tightening into a jagged ruby, burning with red rage. He shot from his rest to stare deeper. A single sleeve rose. The wicked visitor extended a single finger, cracking like twigs under stone. It stretched outwards, more, then further still, stopping only on the roof of the well. Gently, it caressed the edge of the shingles, following the wood down to the stone where the fingers tapped away. Gently, methodically. Nolan kept his distance. The well was no small structure, and this thing hung over it, even hunched. The man stood there, the giant black needle bent and sticking out of the stone. Who are you? Nolan's words surprised even him, the ruby inside him still glowing hot. The fingers stopped. They tightened onto the well, anchoring themselves to the bricks. Ignorant to time, the robe pivoted, gradually. Ochre glistening drops found the moonlight, sliding out of the hood, drip by drip. What are you? His mind made no effort to define what little features of a face there were. Nolan's brain stopped short of any real answer. He only felt the sharp gem of his rage filling the abyss of his gut with flame. Still he stood seething, staring, fixated at its brightest feature. A large orange bow hanging around the skin of its bone-tight neck.